What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and continue learning about the Canadian provinces and territories explained. Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, feel free to go check that out first, or stay here in Part 2. That's cool as well. But in Part 1, I started learning some pretty basic information about Canada that somehow we are just not taught here in America. And actually, on that note, I had a pretty funny thing happen to me yesterday. I was trying to explain the concept of a Canadian province to an American friend of mine, and they looked me dead in the eye, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't even know Canada had a Providence." And I was like, specifically that word, Providence. Like, that in a nutshell. That explains everything. Like, how little Americans actually know about this stuff, about Canada, to be honest. So, believe me when I say this is all much overdue information for me and all of my fellow Americans. So today, I'm very excited to continue learning about the rest of the Canadian provinces, not providences. I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna mess up that now. That's in my mind. The Canadian provinces and territories. In part 1, we learned about Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia. So we're about halfway through. Let's check out the other parts of Canada. Let's see.
Ontario, the capital Ottawa, largest city Toronto. This is your province.
Indeed it is. The most
I was wondering about Ontario. I'm surprised it took this long into this video to get to Ontario because I think, well, it's funny. I can kind of go off my own personal experience with what I grew up knowing about Canada as an American. I think I'm pretty representative of most Americans in this sense. So, when, for the longest time, I didn't know if Ontario was a city or if it was a state. Then I finally learned that Canada doesn't have states. They're called provinces and territories. And Toronto, I think I always knew was a city. And I think if you're an American that lives really far north, very close to the Canadian border, you're probably better at Canadian geography as well. That I have to admit that. But for a lot of us Americans who don't live so far north next to Canada, it's like Ontario, I wasn't really sure what it was. I heard the word a lot growing up. Like, oh, Ontario, that's in Canada. Okay. I'm not sure I heard of many other provinces other than maybe Saskatchewan randomly, Nova Scotia. That's about it. I always got Ontario and Ottawa mixed up too. That was another thing.
most populous province with about 40% of the country's entire population.
Entire country.
This
Whoa! Wow! Really? Now I knew Ontario was popular because, again, that's the province I've heard of growing up. Didn't really know what was there, let alone 40% of the Canadian population. Is that right? 40%. Almost half of Canada lives in one province? Really? That is unbelievable to me. Like, us as Americans, we're pretty spread out, like, among the United States. You know, there's a lot of people in, like, California or New York. Like, you have outliers where there's lots of a dense population, but nothing close to 40% of all of our country in one place for Canada, Ontario. I didn't know that. That's pretty amazing.
This is basically the nucleus that powers much of Canada politically and economically.
It's got the
Okay.
southernmost part of Canada in it, and there's so many things
Right.
going on, like mining, tourism, the service sector, manufacturing, agriculture.
Honestly, the province can really be divided into two separate parts. There's northern and southern Ontario.
Really? Is this how a lot of Canadians think about Ontario? I've never heard of this before. Like, that you actually think of it as Northern Ontario, Southern Ontario. I gotta admit, looking at the photo here, why is Northern Ontario so big? Like, that is not the. Shouldn't you cut Ontario down the middle and the top be north and the bottom be south? Southern Ontario is like the bottom fifth of the province.
Now, northern Ontario is what people where I'm from would call cottage country. Spread out, there's a less of an urban vibe, whereas southern Ontario is a lot more urban, a lot more developed.
Well, and speaking of politics,
Because Southern Ontario is where Toronto is, right? I know some things I've learned. Cottage country? Do Canadians have cottages? Like, what's that all about? What do you mean? Cottages? I don't know anybody who has a cottage. That's like, to me, for most Americans, that's a very fancy, like, for lack of a better word, you have to be kind of wealthy to have a cottage, like a second place. Is this more common in Ontario, or what's up with that?
remember, most politicians in Canada have to be bilingual, mostly because Quebec, that one province.
Prince Edward
What? There's a lot of information here. This is good stuff. Most politicians have to be bilingual in Canada. Really? Man, that is tough. That is a huge barrier to entry. That's not easy to be bilingual. I guess it makes sense if you're representing Canada as a whole. You're representing the English and French speaking parts of Canada, but doesn't that kind of eliminate a lot of really great qualified people who might want to be in the government, but they can't because they're not bilingual? That is, I understand the premise and why that could be necessary. I don't know how all the Canadian government works, but just on its face, when I hear that, it's like, well, in America, nobody's bilingual. Like, if that were a prerequisite, like 1.5% of the population could run for government here.
Prince Edward Island, also known as PEI to its friends. Capital and largest city is Charlottetown.
Sounds like the word
Okay.
charlatan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm actually pronouncing that right, but that's how I grew up pronouncing it.
This place has many nicknames: Spud Island, the Garden of the Gulf, the Million Acre Farm.
It's the
Really?
smallest and least populated province of Canada.
Yeah, Prince Edward Island, I'd never really heard much about. I didn't even know it existed for the longest time. I don't know what the first video I ever did on this channel was, where I learned about Prince Edward Island. It's probably a while ago now. But yeah, not a place we talk about in America. Not really sure what goes on there. The Spud Island? What's up with that? Like potatoes? Okay, sounds nice.
But keep in mind, the territories have even fewer people than that.
Now this place is known mostly
Wow.
for Anne of Green Gables, the book. And they also grow a lot of potatoes, and there's those really cool beaches with sand that squeaks when you step on it.
When I think of PEI, I think of people running through grassy fields wearing 1800s clothes.
Clearly.
Thanks, Anne
What?
of Green Gables.
Yeah, that's all you people are. You wear 150-year-old.
Anne of Green Gables. I've heard that in a couple videos before. I might have to learn more about what that is exactly. Apparently, like a Canadian book, I think.
Clothing. Quebec, the capital city being Quebec City, largest city, of course, being Montreal or Montreal.
Originally,
I've heard of Montreal. Like, most Americans have heard of Montreal. Let's go through this for a second. Most Americans, in regards to Canada and places, most Americans have heard of, but do not know where these are, but we've heard of Ontario, Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, and Montreal. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. For average Americans. Some know more, some know less. On average, that's about it, and we have no idea where they are.
Originally known as La Belle Province, meaning the beautiful province, but now on the license plates it says Je me souviens, which means I remember, which is kind of like throwing shade at the English for treating the Acadians and French Canadians bad.
Yeah.
Whoa. I remember. That's tough. I remember. Maybe I shouldn't joke about that. Sounds like some pretty serious undertones to that. That's just on the license plates. I remember. Oh my god.
History. Yeah,
Kind
yeah.
of deserved.
Yeah, they are the largest
Okay.
province in size. Obviously, they are the French-speaking province.
Oh, Quebec is the largest. Yeah. I never really thought about how north it goes. Holy cow. Quebec is huge. I've never just stopped and looked at Quebec. Have you ever just looked at it for a second? Looks like a chicken nugget with some weird gangly things hanging off. Maybe not, but I don't know. It goes so much further north than I ever thought. It's actually as north as some of the territories. Who lives up there? Does anyone live in just northern Quebec? What's going on up there?
It's actually their only official language. However, most people in most major cities are bilingual with English.
Yeah,
Wow.
everything from TV, radio, newspapers, schools are in French.
Quebec is actually the only province in Canada I have been to, and I noticed when I was there, they speak French a little differently. To me, it sounds a little more twangy and kind of guttural, like "Regardez là." Or, I don't know. It's hard to explain. And also, I noticed they
There's a Quebec French accent. Like, it's different than the French accent. I don't listen to French people a lot in general, like ever. I think we all know the French accent, like that kind of thing, like stereotypical French accent. So is it really actually noticeable that Quebecois speak French in a slightly different accent? That'd be fun to hear.
used a lot of different words. It's kind of like they condense it. Like instead of saying qu'est-ce que, they say qu'est-ce.
Fun fact, traffic
Huh.
lights are also sideways.
Also, the food. They're known for inventing poutine.
Ah.
or poutine.
They're also the largest supplier of maple syrup, and they even have the world's largest maple syrup reserve.
Quebec makes the maple syrup. That is, I don't know what we picture when we picture Canadian maple syrup production. Like, I just thought it's like everywhere in Canada makes lots of syrup. But it's like, no, it's mostly in Quebec. How random. Why is that? That is cool, but why?
Saskatchewan, capital city.
Regina!
Largest city, Saskatoon.
This is the Prairie Province, the breadbasket of Canada.
This is the flattest
Okay.
part of Canada, kind of like Iowa or Nebraska. They've got lots of wheat fields, and they grow the most crops.
It's like Iowa and Nebraska. That's actually helpful to me. Is there like a lot of farming, flat, countryside? Saskatchewan, somehow it kind of fits.
They're also kind of known as the Tornado Alley of Canada.
I don't know. I feel like Saskatchewan is kind of like the place where you would go to like run from the law. Cornfields. nobody's gonna want to go all the way to Saskatchewan to catch you. I mean, come on. What do you think about Saskatchewan people?
They're probably nice. I've never actually met anyone from Saskatchewan. I assume there's
That's like what I tend to think. With Americans, the more out in the middle of nowhere, the more small town feel you get, the nicer people tend to be, more, I don't know, genuine, like not corrupted by the horrors of dense city life and modern living somehow. I don't know if that's true.
some nice country folk.
Running from the law.
And now we reach the territories. Together they
Okay.
only have a combined population of less than 200,000.
All three of them. Yeah, it's
Wow.
like really hard to live here. It's like super cold like most of the year, and it lies on the barren Canadian.
Yeah, it's so funny thinking about population size. Like 200,000. That's like a lot of American, medium-sized American cities. Maybe small. Like, I think California has like the population of Canada, the whole country. If I'm not mistaken, I think so.
Canadian Shield.
Yeah, most of the people who are out there are either there for the mining industry or they're the native people who live there.
Okay.
So here they are. The Northwest Territories. Capital, Yellowknife.
It is
That's kind of cool that it's like, to me, I might be wrong, but it's almost like these territories are known for or dedicated to Native Canadians. In America, there's nothing equivalent to this. There's not like states that are like for the Native American people. There's areas of certain states where they have reserves that are protected for them, but nothing quite like this. Although of all the places to get, maybe the Native Canadians are happy with the territories, but it's like, oh God, you really. I hope they enjoy that land, because personally, isn't it really far north and therefore very cold and sort of tough living conditions? But maybe that's just a part of their heritage, and there's something beautiful about that too.
Canada's last frontier and polar bear land.
Fun fact, they have 11 official languages, 9 in addition to English and French. Most of them are from various native tribes like the Cree, the Slavey, the Chippewa, or the Gwich'in, and like a ton of others.
And it has the largest non-shared lake, also known as Great Slave Lake.
Great Slave Lake. I've never heard of this.
And named after the Slavey people.
Not slaves, Slavey, it's a tribe. Also known as the Dene people, which are actually the ancestors of the Navajo, which live in Arizona. See how we get like a lot of...
Yeah, Arizona. Arizona has some Native American tribes. Yeah, I've heard of that.
So much connection between these two land masses, It's just like, we take your people.
That comes out wrong. We take your people from your land.
It's not good.
Yeah, we kidnap Canadians.
It's not good.
Nunavut, capital Iqaluit.
That's how you pronounce it. None of it, right? Not wrong.
I mean, that's how I pronounce it.
Land of the Midnight Sun.
Probably the most isolated and obscure territory, as there are...
Yeah, this is the one that just goes north with all these islands. But there's actually people who live there, which is pretty impressive to me.
There are no roads that connect to it directly from the rest of Canada, so you can only fly or sail.
This is actually the newest addition to the Confederation of Canada. It actually split off from the Northwest Territories back in 1999. This territory is predominantly inhabited by the...
Oh. This is Nunavut, right? So, it didn't even exist, but 25 years ago. Wow, I didn't know about that.
Native Inuktitut and Inuinnaqtun peoples. Whew. They actually have their own writing system. It's pretty cool. You could see it on street signs. And yeah, they just got their own traditions and customs and stuff like that. It's really interesting.
Pretty cool.
And it also holds Paul's favorite island that he's affectionately named Pancake Island.
Canada is so interesting. When you think about it, it's very different to the United States in the sense that there's all these different regions devoted to different peoples and walks of life, like French Canada parts that are French-speaking and French culture. There's these more native parts with a lot of native Canadian culture. There's the English-speaking parts, the Saskatchewan, the farmland, prairie parts, the British Columbia, foresty, coastal. Then Prince Edward Island, and all those, provinces on the eastern side of Canada, very, very diverse. Canada is very diverse. Very interesting. This really did deserve its own video.
The island inside the lake, inside the island, inside the lake, inside of Victoria Island. Yeah, I want to go there someday. And finally, the last one, Yukon, sometimes referred to as the Yukon. Capital, Whitehorse.
It is the least populated of all the territories. It is also known as the Gold Rush Territory, known for the Klondike Gold Rush, and also the westernmost territory bordering Alaska.
It also has Mount Logan, Canada's tallest mountain.
Right, for all those Americans in Alaska, they're probably, very familiar with the Yukon, maybe going... I don't know what Americans... what's going on in Alaska. Shouldn't Alaska just be part of Canada? If we're being completely honest, I don't know the history of Alaska. I don't know what goes... Alaska might as well be Canada. For the rest of us 49 other states, we do not know what is going on in Alaska.
It's kind of like Alaska's girlfriend. So many people cross the border. Yeah.
They're just you gotta have Alaska and Yukon working together. They're just right next to each other. And that is it.
That is it. Woo! Okay. This is a very good video, by the way. This is going back to school. Much needed. This was by Geography Now. I gotta give it a like. That was a great, brief, but concise explanation of the Canadian provinces and territories, where they are, what they're about, what's going on. Stuff that us Americans really, we do not learn about. We don't hear about it. Don't spend time on it in school, really. Not that I remember. I bet you we go over Canada like once in second grade geography. Like one day, like part of a lesson in one day and then never again. Like that, because most Americans just don't know this stuff. It's a little embarrassing, but good. I feel better after today. This was much overdue. So I enjoyed this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Canada's provinces and territories. That'd be fun to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and learning about Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. Until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.